the shepherd boy and the wolf, or as you know it, the boy who cried wolf. A shepherd's boy was tending his flock near a village, and he thought it would be great fun to hoax the villagers by pretending that a wolf was attacking the sheep. So he shouted out, "Wolf! Wolf!" And when the people came running up, he laughed at them for their pains. Let's laugh at it. Laugh at them. Well done. He did this more than once, and every time the villagers found they had been hoaxed, for there was no wolf at all. Do you know what happens next? At last, a wolf really did come, and the boy cried, "Wolf, wolf!" as loud as he could. But the people were so used to hearing him call that they took no notice of his cries for help, and so the wolf had it all his own way and killed off sheep after sheep at his leisure. You cannot believe a liar even when he tells the truth. How many of you know that story? The boy who cried wolf. Yeah, we know that story. It's pretty famous. It reminds me of something that Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Let your yes be yes and your no be no, because anything more than this comes from the evil one, or comes from a place of evil. When I was younger, I didn't quite understand what that meant. I thought that was just another way of saying don't swear. Don't take an oath, don't swear, because that's what he's saying in the sermon. He's like, you don't need to take an oath, you don't need to swear by anything. And what if you did? You don't have ownership. If you swear by heaven, well, that's where God is. You don't own heaven. You can't swear by something that isn't yours. And if you swear by the earth, you can't do that. That's God's footstool. And so Jesus goes on a whole rant with the audience about how your word, your promise, doesn't need to be sealed with an oath. Just say yes or say no and mean it. And as I've gotten older, I've learned how important that really is. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. In fact, throughout my life, I've often had to swear or promise people or say, I'm not joking, I swear, I promise. Some of you are good at that. You could think of 3 or 4 things you would swear by. Somebody's grave, or your loved one's lives, or put your hand on the Bible. All of these are ways of taking oath. They're ways of saying, I actually mean what I'm saying. But think of the implication. If I have to swear or make an oath, it's because I don't always mean what I'm saying. Otherwise, you would just believe me. My yes would just mean yes, and my no would mean no. The fact that I have to say any more than that is evidence that there's something evil inside of me, something deceitful, something manipulative. At the very least, something that exaggerates. So I thought about that some more, about the story of the boy who cried wolf and what Jesus said, and I have just 3 points this morning. The first one is the cost of deceit, and I'm going to stand up. Proverbs 12:22. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who act faithfully are his delight. Those who act faithfully are his delight. We'll get to the acting faithfully half in a second. Let's start with the cost of deceit, the lying lips that are an abomination to the Lord. If you think about it, I'm sure you've told a lie. How many of you have told a lie? Yeah. I couldn't tell you how many I've told throughout my life, especially when I was a kid. Deceit comes easy. I think even more so when you're young. I think when you're young, you're more afraid, and fear causes us to do stupid things, like tell lies, which end up getting us into more trouble in the long run. What was it Walter Scott said? Oh, what a tangled web we weave when at first we practice to deceive. Did anybody hear that when they were kids? Yeah. That's a good word of wisdom from an old Scottish poet. I didn't take it to heart and continue to lie throughout my life, or at least bend the truth. I call it bending the truth. I think it sounds nicer and a little more wholesome than telling an outright lie. So what I do is I bend the truth. In communication, we would say acts of simulation and dissimulation. I add a little bit to the story, or I take certain details away. But either way, I'm manipulating the truth. I'm bending the truth to my own benefit in some degree. So I think we all do that. And we can all understand the negative impact it has, the cost of our deceit. And I want to start by thinking about in our families. So in your own family, do you have people, or are you perhaps a person who exaggerates or overreacts? Are you someone who's, the word we would use is very dramatic? Do you know anybody? Perhaps they were at your Thanksgiving dinner this past week. And all the while you have to wonder if what they say is even true, because so much of what they say is a bending of the truth. It's a manipulation. It's a deceit. That was very telling. I thought of another example that's a little less seemingly evil, and yet it's something I'm guilty of a lot, and that is exaggerating in sarcastic ways, or even just being sarcastic in general. Until this week, I don't know that I had really sat down and considered how sarcasm is a practice in deceit. But when I do it, it often is. It's somehow deceitful, or it's like the boy who cried wolf. It's me using some untruth or some over-exaggerated reaction or something to amuse myself, or perhaps to amuse the people around me. And that's exactly what the boy who cried wolf is doing, the shepherd boy. He's amusing himself and at the expense of other people. And so I thought about sarcasm a lot this week, or just anytime I've said after saying something, I'm just kidding. How many of you say that a lot? I'm just kidding, which is like a cover-up for being mean. It's like I shouldn't have said that. I'm just kidding. Why did I say it at all? It's been hard for me thinking this week about how applicable this story is to my life in an embarrassing way, to be blunt. I thought about my kids. They do this. They are dramatic. They over-exaggerate. I mean, we have little kids. Everybody who has little kids knows what this is like. Little kids are dramatic. They think everything's a big deal. They trip and scrape their knee, and they have a new terminal illness, right? They're screaming and crying in pain and writhing on the floor, and you go to check them out, and there's like a tiny little cut on their knee, right? But there's blood, so they're dying. They're probably going to die within an hour, and they need you to get them help. I'm doing it right now. I'm being sarcastic right now. Apparently for my own amusement, because none of you seemed amused. Maybe you just didn't get it. That's the problem. All my jokes are just over your head. That's what I tell myself so I don't feel embarrassed. Yeah, my kids do this. I mean, whose kids don't do this? But the problem is I know grown-ups who do this. And so do you, who make everything such a big deal. They, as we say, make a mountain out of a molehill. They make big stuff out of little things. So then when a big thing happens, how do you know if it's real? How do you know to care? When my kids are actually hurt, how do I know? After all the times they pretended to be hurt when they weren't really. It's a strange thing. I thought about something I did years ago. So Kylie and I just had our 11th anniversary, so that's a long time for her to put up with me. The first year we were married, though, was definitely the worst. We did not have the honeymoon period people talk about. It was like it was just a cloud of doom and gloom over our marriage the first year. And it was mostly my fault, if I'm being honest. We didn't live here yet. We still lived in East Tennessee. And it was hard. I was in grad school. We had financial struggles at first. We lived in a rental trailer, a mobile home. That sounds nicer. It was nice. I mean, we had a good life. We had a car that was dependable. We had clothes to wear and food to eat. We weren't really in any trouble, but we were also learning to live with one another for the first time. We went to a Bible college, so we had to follow the traditional protocol of waiting until we married to move in together, and that created some new problems in our lives. I had never lived with a woman before, and she had never lived with a man before, other than our parents growing up. And so it was all new, and we fought a lot about a lot of things. But one of the things I did to ease the tension was use my charisma and sense of humor. And almost every evening when we would sit down for dinner, and we usually ate at home to save money, we would cook, and by that I mean she would usually cook, I would sit down, and I would take the first bite, and I would always say, or something stupid like that, and act like I was choking or dying, and I'd say, no, I'm just kidding, it's really good. And I thought that was so hilarious. Until 2 or 3 months into our marriage, she said, with tears in her eyes, why do you do that? And I don't know if she just had a bad day that day or if she had just had enough and that was the straw that broke Kylie's back. I don't know. But she was upset, and I was confused. I said, I don't know why you're teary-eyed. What did I do? She said, you do this all the time. Probably 3 or 4 nights a week, you make some joke about the food, like it's poison or like it tastes bad or something. Do you not know that I'm self-conscious, that I'm cooking for you, my new husband, and I want you to like it, and I don't know if you like it or not because you're always so sarcastic all the time. And she basically lit into me about how sarcastic I am. And she's, for such a meek and quiet person, she can be pretty mean. And she hurt me, okay, with her words. No, I'm only joking. She did make me really self-aware, though, because to this day, first of all, I try not to ever do anything stupid like that when I eat food, but I've also realized how many other arenas of my life are filled with sarcasm and almost insulting forms of sarcasm at the expense of other people because it brings me amusement. It makes light of a situation. It makes something seem funny. And I'm just so afraid of being bored that I have to make everything funny. And sometimes that hurts people. And I had to think about that. My sarcasm, my stupid sense of humor was hurting someone that I love the most. And so I've tried to work on it. I had just already planted those seeds in her mind, and now she's sarcastic to me, and I have no patience for that. So I'm just kidding. See? You're going to catch me doing this a lot now. It's true not only in our families, it's true in our workplaces. Think about the cost of deceit where you work, or if you're retired, where you previously worked, or in any arena where you volunteer your time or you serve other people. When people break promises, it sinks their credibility. How can you trust a person who doesn't follow through? When they say one thing, but they don't do it. They do something quite the opposite at times. And what about gossip and backbiting and saying things about people that are not honest or truthful or not to their face, but behind their backs? Even if it is truthful, if you don't do it in a constructive way, then it's a manipulation of the truth because you're using it to harm another person instead of helping. In all these ways, our dishonesty, our deceit brings ruin even into workplaces when there's no transparency between employers and their employees and the leadership and those underneath the leadership, and no one knows what's really happening or why it's happening. Things become messy. Rumors begin to mill around, and people eventually lose their minds and get angry and frustrated, and there's feelings of isolation and all these other things that happen, and it's really bad for business. We see it in classrooms. We see it in hospitals. We see it in factories and power plants, and anywhere you go around here, you're going to see this to be true, that there is a cost to human deceit. When we are not honest people of integrity, someone pays the price. And all of this takes a toll on our mental well-being. Think of the anxiety and the fear that's bred by dishonesty, by exaggeration or withholding information or sarcasm or all these ways that we can be dishonest. Think of the impact that has on people in their own psyche, in their minds. People don't know when someone's being honest with them. People don't know when to believe something. Think about that with modern media. We don't know what to trust at all anymore. People are as cynical as they've ever been and skeptical as they've ever been for good reason, because our world is full of little lies and bendings of the truth at every corner. How could you trust anyone ever? It's tough. It's tough. I thought of a biblical example of this. Samson in Judges. He was, of course, one of the great and powerful judges in Israel. Before they had kings, they had judges. And they would raise up a judge, God would raise up a judge to deliver the people from the hand of an enemy, to settle some disputes, to bring some peace and accord to the land. And Samson was one of those great leaders. He was big and strong and powerful, and he had, from birth, been placed under a Nazirite vow, which meant he wouldn't cut his hair or drink any alcohol or touch any dead bodies. And so he had followed these commands all his life and developed this divine strength. But then he met a beautiful woman named Delilah, and he fell for her, and they had this great love affair that was really quite bizarre, where she keeps trying to find the secret to his strength and bring ruin to his life. And he doesn't seem to get that. He's apparently blinded by lust. I don't know what the deal is. Or he's just so arrogant that he thinks he's untouchable. But he deceives her. She says, "What's the secret to your strength?" How many of you know this story? Are you familiar with it? So Delilah says, "What's the secret to your strength?" And he tells her all these crazy things, right? And she tries them, and then every time she's so devastated, "You lied to me." And he's like, "You tried that? You tried to take away my strength? Why would you do that?" No, he doesn't. He doesn't even question. He's like, "Nah, got you again." And he just keeps doing this until finally he tells her the truth. He gets caught up in all of these lies, and he lets the truth slip out, and it brings ruin to him. He loses his strength, his freedom, and soon enough, by the hand of the Philistines, he loses his own life. Frankly, he loses his own life by his own hands because he pulls the pillars in. But the point is, he's become enslaved by the Philistines, and he dies a prisoner, taking with him some of the enemies in his own death. If you don't know the story, go back to Judges 16, I think. You can read some of that story. But the point is, his deceit cost him, and it cost people around him dearly. Our deceit has a price. But there's a flip side of that coin, and that's the second point this morning, and that's the value of truth and honesty and integrity, or the foundational work of trust. Because all of the concern we have about honesty and integrity is really rooted in a deeper principle in the Bible of trust. I think I've told you the word faith, pistis, that word literally means trust or trustworthy. And so when the Bible says we need to be people of faith, it doesn't mean you have to believe certain things, although that's part of it. It's much bigger than that, and it's more profound than that. It means you have to be people of trustworthiness, people who trust God and people who become trustworthy. Faithfulness is another good translation, faithfulness. And so I think about the beauty of faithfulness and being honest and truthful. Ephesians 4, verse 25, St. Paul wrote, "Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another." So put away falsehood, get rid of the stuff that's going to cost you, and instead speak the truth with your neighbor, because we are members one of another. We're one body. Paul's telling the church in Ephesus, we're all one body in Christ. We need to help each other out. We need to be honest and truthful with one another. So think about what that means in your family. When parents are honest with their kids, something I've been trying to do more and more is admit my failures to my children, even while they're small enough to not quite understand, and when I could sort of get away with it. Of course, teenagers eventually, they see right through all of that. But little kids tend to think their parents are untouchable, right? They're the epitome of what we're looking up to be. And then as you grow older, you hate your parents for a few years, like middle school age. And then high school, you love them again, but you just want a lot of distance. You love them because they pay for the stuff you need until you can get out of there. Something like that. But when you're little, you just sort of assume the best in your parents. And you've seen this with children, that they sort of assume the best in their parents. Wouldn't it be healthy if you taught those kids who are so naive to think you're perfect at that point in life that you're not? Wouldn't that be a good point to start showing them, like, hey, I also make mistakes. And when I correct you, it's because I also need correction, because we all have room to grow. And as I've tried to do that more with my children, it's paying off dividends. Like I see it in a day-to-day lived experience. My kids are helping me even at times. That takes some humility to let your 6 or 7 or 8-year-old correct you and say, Daddy, you're doing that thing again you said you weren't going to do. I'm like, okay, you're right. Let me lower my voice. I'll take a breath. Sorry, I didn't mean to yell. I didn't mean to snap. Whatever it is, right? It's healthy to have accountability in the home. But too many parents are afraid, I think, of being vulnerable with their kids. There's also a profound transformation in a child when they've been exposed to vulnerable adults who know how to be honest and truthful in a helpful way, not in a self-deprecating way, but in a helpful and honest way. Then those kids become more true and trustworthy kids. They start to admit more readily that they've done wrong. They don't just blame their sibling or some other person all the time, right? They're quicker to take the blame for something they've done, to own up to their own mistakes, to try to make improvements, to seek help. It benefits everybody. Spouses, when they're honest with one another, create healthier marriages. And it extends into all the reaches of families. But also, again, in the workplace, when you have relationships at work where people are really honest with one another and they have collaboration and teamwork as we're meant to have it, things are usually productive and successful. But when people withhold truth, when they're not honest, when they are deceitful, we know that doesn't happen. It holds back progress. It creates division and dissension. And so there's a great foundation built in trust that allows people to really just do what they're meant to do without distraction. It's something we take for granted, but it's profoundly important. We have to have trust where we live, where we work. So you know, in an interview, a job interview, you don't know this is funny yet because you're not in my brain. You ever been interviewed for a job? Anybody in here? Just nod your heads. Yeah. Okay. Maybe you haven't. Okay. They usually ask you something like, what are your greatest strengths? And then perhaps what is your greatest weakness? And that's a good question. But I have officially interviewed someone. It was actually here at the church, interviewing someone years ago. And he said his greatest weakness was that he cares too much. And then he went on to explain how it was really his strength. And I rolled my eyes and said, I will definitely not be hiring that person. Why? Because it's not honest. It's not honest. Your greatest weakness is not your strength. And if you can't acknowledge your weaknesses and be honest about them, then you can't improve. You can't correct them. You're not teachable. You're not humble. And then you're not going to be a good employee at any job. And so I just wrote a note about that in here to remember, don't do that, right? I want to remind you, don't do that. Actually know what your weaknesses are, and then know how you are working on them. That's what someone wants to hear. Have you discovered weak points in your armor, and what are you doing to shore up those weak points, to strengthen them? That's what people want to know. That's what we need to know to better one another. That's where accountability happens. Accountability is honesty at its core. There is no accountability if you're not honest and vulnerable. You think about that. Now I'm talking about in life in general, not just home or work, the church, anywhere. If you're not honest with people, there is no accountability. You have to be real. And I think too many people are used to being fake. They're used to being dishonest, not telling the whole truth, not being willing to share what's really inside. Jesus said in John 8:32, you will know the truth. Do you know the rest? The truth will set you free. The truth will set you free. Paul, the apostle, said, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. As if to say freedom itself is prize enough, that just the state of freedom is the goal. And Jesus has conquered freedom for us in being truthful. His faithfulness, his trustworthiness, his honesty, his integrity have brought about our freedom. It's good to be free. Freedom is hard, it's challenging, but it brings its own reward. Some of you can comprehend what I'm saying. Some of you may not have the spiritual acumen to quite understand what I'm saying, but eventually you will know. Freedom itself is a beautiful prize, and Christ has offered it to his people to live in freedom. And in the place of freedom, there is peace. There's less anxiety. I have a really bad memory. That's why I forget what's in my notes half the time. I was, probably in my early 20s, and having breakfast with some older men from a church where I was doing an internship. And they took me on some hospital calls and nursing home visits, and then we had breakfast or lunch. And I distinctly remember talking about forgetting things. And they said, oh, yeah, wait till you get older, you'll forget everything. You'll forget where you put your keys, you'll forget to turn this on or turn that off. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, well, I already have that, and I'm 20-something. So they laughed, and they said, it's going to get worse from here. And then there was just like a little pause, and then this older man chimed in, and he said, you know what I always say? If you tell the truth, if you always tell the truth, you don't need a good memory. And I'll never forget that because it's clever. If you tell the truth, you don't need a good memory. Meaning you don't have to remember the lies that you've told to cover up your tracks because you are a person of honesty. Your yes will be yes and your no will be no. And there's no games that have to be played. There's no manipulating that has to be done. You can just be yourself at all times and not have to worry. That's helpful advice. It's good for me. Maybe it's helpful for you. I thought of someone in the Bible. Someone who I think was free from guilt and didn't have to manipulate. And that was Joseph in the book of Genesis. Joseph was a man of integrity and honesty. Even when he was pushed to his limits, he maintained his integrity, and he was rewarded for it. But he first suffered at the hands of his brothers. Then Potiphar's wife made those false accusations against him. All these things happened to him, dishonest things. But he remained honest and faithful. And look at what it did for him. He becomes second in command in all of Egypt to Pharaoh. He's basically a king and gets to save all kinds of people's lives during a famine. It's a really remarkable story. But at the core of Joseph's story is his honesty and integrity, that he knows that God is honest and trustworthy, so he chooses to be honest and trustworthy. You could also choose that in your life. You may not save a bunch of people from a famine, but you can do good. You can make a difference in the world just by choosing a path of honesty and integrity, choosing what I'm going to call the better way. And so here's the third point this morning, and it's the danger of ignoring the real warnings. So the problem in the story of the boy who cried wolf, the problem is his dishonesty, but the problem that it creates later is the loss of sheep, right? That's the sad part of the story. In some versions, the boy himself gets eaten by the wolf, which is kind of satisfying, actually, but dark. So, shouldn't celebrate that, but it's, he deserved it. I'm joking. That's that sarcasm I was talking about. If you think about it, when people are deceptive and dramatic and over-exaggerate or leave out important details, when they do all these things, then they try to do something serious or important, we don't know to believe them. We don't take it seriously. And so, like the boy who cried wolf, there's a great loss in the end. There's a danger in ignoring the real warnings, not being able to perceive what is real, what is true, what is important, whether that's at home or at work or even, God forbid, in the church. And I know this may not relate to all of you because you don't work in ministry like I do, but you are part of a church and you're part of Christian culture. And so it's worth mentioning. Christians have a real knack, especially in the American West and in our modern church, but I'd say Christians do it everywhere all the time. We have a knack for bending the truth to our own benefit or amusement or in judgment of those outside. And an example would be anytime there's a cultural shift and we say that's the work of the Antichrist and demons, and we accuse people in our culture, celebrities or anybody else, of being Antichrist or demon-possessed because they sang a song with too many curse words or illicit lyrics, or they promoted some book that we think is heretical, or I don't know, just anything. Politics, pop culture, the world around us, economy, anything you want to focus on, any arena of modern life, you will see Christians who throw around very serious labels toward people and groups of people, individuals and groups, and sort of carelessly and I think dishonestly manipulate what is possibly some truth and make a big deal out of it. So that, for example, modern Christians are persecuted in public schools today, which I hope you know is not true. That's just not true. My kids are followers of Jesus. They go to public school and they love it. They're not persecuted at all. They're cared for and loved. And yet, if you talk to some Christians today, they would tell you that modern American schools are persecuting believers. What they mean is they don't have the same convenient privileges they used to have, or certain practices they're used to have been questioned or removed in public schools. That's not the same thing as being persecuted. And it's hard for me to take those people seriously when I have friends who live in nations serving in the mission field who are actually persecuted, where families ostracize their own loved ones for proclaiming they follow Jesus or for being baptized into faith. I know people who are under threat of imprisonment right now for promoting the gospel and sharing Bibles with people. When you know that level of persecution exists, it's hard to take serious anyone who claims that what we see here in our country is persecution. Is this making sense? It's a bending of the truth, and it takes our credibility away. That's what I'm trying to tell you. So that when there is a real problem, which I think there will be soon enough, real problems, no one's going to listen. No one's going to care because we made a big deal out of every little thing that was inconvenient or uncomfortable. So when there's real pain and discomfort or real persecution, no one's going to listen anymore. And the wolf will have his way with every last sheep. That's my fear, is that our bending of the truth, our manipulating, our over-exaggerating, or just playing victim all the time, whether it's for our own amusement or I don't know what the purpose is, it's going to ruin the situation later when there's a real threat. There won't be a way to get help because no one will listen anymore. Is that making sense? I hope so. It's a real concern that I have for the modern church. Instead, I want to think like Luke Stamps, who's another pastor. He said this, and I think it's really good. The spiritually mature are more concerned with building something beautiful than with tearing down everything that's ugly. The spiritually mature are much more concerned with building something beautiful than they are with tearing down everything that's ugly. That's a good quote. Too many Christians spend their days trying to tear down every ugly thing they can find in the world. But what the world needs, by the way, they can keep building ugly things. You're not going to stop them. What the world needs is examples of beauty and goodness. Instead of complaining about all the dishonesty all around us, what if we became people of honesty and integrity? We gave them an example to follow, the way that Jesus did. That would be the better way. Oppositional energy just creates more of the same. It's just an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And soon enough, the whole world is blind, right? That's not good. That's not the way Christians ought to respond. That's not the way Jesus responded. Instead, show them the better way. So rather than crying wolf, we could build trust through honesty. We could become reliable people. And we could work hard at whatever we do. I think our greatest and most obvious example of that is Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said to his friend Thomas in John 14 when he was asking, "Where are you going? We don't know the way." He said, "Thomas, I am the way." And then he said that next phrase, "and the truth and the life." He goes on to tell his friends, the only way to God is through my way to God. My way, my truth, my life. Jesus wasn't just being exclusive, saying my way is the only way. He was being explanatory. He's saying, this is how you get to God. We quote that inappropriately now. We use it to basically condemn every other religious movement, like, our way is the only way. Yes, I still agree with that. I think ultimately all truth leads to Jesus, the embodiment of God's truth. I firmly believe that. But that's not really what Jesus was meaning. These were his own disciples. They already believed in him. He wasn't saying, stop believing in other people, believe in me. He was saying, my way is the way to follow. You don't know how to get to God, but I'm showing you right now. And he went on to show them through love and integrity and honesty and self-sacrifice. This is the path to God. My way, my truth, my life. Jesus is the example. And Jesus is a great example of truth and trustworthiness. A man of honesty and integrity. Think about the life of Jesus. He never lied. He never bent the truth or manipulated the truth. He never had to deceive people to get what he needed or what he wanted. He said the truth even when it was difficult at times, which is also a hard thing about being honest. Is sometimes it's easier to lie. It feels better. It feels nicer. And yet it's not always the right thing to do. Telling the truth can be painful and difficult, but again, that's where accountability comes from. Jesus knew how to be accountable in a way of gentleness and love, but he told the truth. He never lied, and he never manipulated. So he becomes this great example. You can trust him. So some practical takeaways. The boy who cried wolf lost the sheep, possibly in some versions lost his own life, all because he was deceitful and bent the truth, in part for his own amusement, and we don't know why else, but he did. And because he did, he suffered and others suffered. The townspeople lost their sheep. It wasn't just the boy who would suffer. It was his family and the whole town. And so we need to be different, right? We need to be different than that boy. So how can we do that? I'm going to give you three takeaways. 1, commit to honesty in your words and actions. Commit to honesty in your words and in your actions. Be people who tell the truth. You can do that starting right now. Maybe you haven't always been the most honest person, but you can be. Number 2, build trust by being reliable in your families and workplaces. Basically, the day-to-day places you go and live your life. Be someone who is reliable Do what you say you will do. Some of you are not feeling convicted enough by that statement the way that I am. I feel deeply convicted by that. Do what you say you will do. Don't make empty promises to people. Don't say yes when you should say no. Which leads to the third point. Don't exaggerate or be dramatic. Don't overreact to things. Don't undersell things when they are important to try to save face. Tell the plain truth. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Anything more than that comes from a place of evil.